Chair, we are now live on YouTube.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to members of the public who may be watching this virtual recovery and response and recovery committee on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Caroline Kerr and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting to make sure that their mobile phones are switched off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. As I've already mentioned, this meeting is going to be broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting. Members and officers are reminded to keep their microphones on mute unless they're called to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak by typing their name in the chat function. I think people are fairly familiar with this process now, and please don't use the chat function for any other conversation, partly because the chat stream will not be seen on the live public broadcast. The councillors who are here are members of this committee, and I would now like to introduce those councillors who, please could you indicate your presence when I call your name. So first of all, Councillor Rowena Bass.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Fiona Bolt.
Good evening.
Councillor Kevin Davis.
Hi.
Councillor Lorraine Dunstan.
Good evening.
Councillor Hilary Gander.
Good evening.
Councillor Andreas Kirsch.
Good evening.
Councillor Dave Ryder-Mills.
Good evening.
Councillor Rebecca Moll.
Good evening, all.
Councillor Christine Stewart.
Good evening.
And Councillor John Sweeney.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you all. We have also a number of officers in attendance this evening who are present to give an overview of reports and advice during the meeting. Their cameras and microphones will be turned off unless they are called upon to speak on matters other than the provision of procedural advice. So the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence and the attendance of substitute members. Fiona, are there any apologies or substitutions?
Yes, Chair. I have apologies from Councillors Cobbett, Councillors Davey and Councillor White. Councillor Dunstone is substituting for Councillor Cobbett. Councillor Ryder-Mills is substituting for Councillor Davey, and Councillor Stewart is substituting for Councillor White.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other non-pecuniary interests relevant to items on the agenda. Do any members have declarations of interest? Please indicate using the chat and I'll call you to speak. Doesn't appear that there are any declarations of interest, so we'll move on to the minutes. The minutes of the committee meeting on the 30th of July 2020. Are there any objections to approving those minutes as correct? Thank you. I will sign those minutes at a convenient moment. So let's move then to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is the Financial Monitoring Report 2020 to 2021, month 3. And I'm going to ask Councillor Kirsch, please, to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. Whilst we are noting the revenue and capital budget monitoring for 2020 and 2021, month 3, and approve the additions and changes to the capital programme set out in paragraphs 74 to 77, we also have to note the impact of this report on the delivery of RBK's medium-term financial strategy and next year's budget. We shall not forget that we are still in the middle of a global pandemic, and we cannot and shall not underestimate the financial challenges we are facing as a council. Yet, we are not alone in this. All local authorities across the country are facing similar challenges. We have seen a huge increase in demand on our services, whereas at the same time we are facing a significant loss of income. Some of that loss has already had a huge impact on this year's budget, whilst some of it will have an impact on future budgets. The budget monitoring report forecasts an overspend of 9.6 million, hence demanding an ever more prudent budget setting for next year. However, it is also important to bear in mind that the estimated overspend is even more in flux than in previous years. We are still in a global pandemic, and any further local or national lockdown would impact on this forecast. Furthermore, with a massive economic downturn and the spectre of hundreds of thousands of people losing their job nationally, it is hard to predict how the impact in terms of increased demand and loss of income on Kingston will be. And all this is not taking into account any further economic downturn and job losses associated with the end of the transition period and the void of any meaningful arrangement with our biggest economic partners, the European Union. So far, central government has supported local authorities, and we are grateful for our share. But unfortunately, that support is still not sufficient to mitigate the increased demand and the loss of income. The LGA, many local authorities and RBK are lobbying the government to increase the support further, but any success in this regard remains to be seen. We still have no clarity or certainty regarding the announcement of the government to help local authorities with the loss of fees and charges and the spreading of the collection fund deficit over the next 3 years. Hopefully, we will get this clarity soon. With these uncertainties in mind, and in order to face the challenges ahead, non-essential recruitment has been stopped. Work is ongoing to realize additional in-year savings and to generate additional income. Furthermore, RBK is lobbying central government for more support, and conversations with the Department of Education to address the structural underfunding of the dedicated schools grants are continuing. We have to face the financial challenges in a calm and prudent manner, whilst ensuring that we deliver services for our residents and communities. Hence, I would like to move item 4.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirsch, and I'll be very happy to second that. Do any officers have anything to add before we go to debate? If not, then could members of the committee indicate in the chat function if they would like to speak about this item? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'd start by thanking officers for the report. This is the sort of detailed report we should be receiving, and I'm thankful that we've now got a report that actually does summarise where exactly we are as a local authority. I don't have any direct comments because many of the comments of my colleagues have already been answered by officers through questions they've asked themselves. I suppose my general point is, on which I'd like a response on from Councillor Kirsch, is that clearly we've identified where the overspends and underspends are, but given this is a recovery committee, I'm a bit surprised I don't see much flesh on how we intend to get back to a balanced budget. It seems very, very thin in terms of actually a description about what things are going to happen. And I get that we're into recruitment freezes and things like that, but we've done that every year for the last 10 years when we've had much smaller budget deficits and got ourselves back on track. We'd be interested to hear from the administration and Councillor Kirsch when we can expect to see a recovery plan for our finances.
Councillor Kirsch.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Davis. In regards to your question, and additionally to the stopping of non-essential recruitment, we are obviously still lobbying, as I mentioned before, the government. But then again, you can rightly argue that's not something we do in terms of how we do our own finances. Nevertheless, it's very important to do so. And we are at early stages of the budget process. So obviously we have to look into in-year savings. We also have for next year's budget to look to make savings, whilst at the same time, obviously, delivering the services for our communities and for our residents. What we are going to do is looking holistically this year on the whole budget, where we can make meaningful savings, how we can try to balance the budget, and at the same time looking how we can also look into additional income generation. There's also the question what we potentially can do with some of our assets. The government has not introduced, but made it more easy to capitalize assets for in-year budgets. So we have to carefully look and prudently look if we are going down that route in whatever way. So at the moment we are at very early stages, but what we want to do is bring everything on the table and have a proper look where we can make sensible savings and savings we need to make for a balanced budget for next year. And obviously lobbying at the same time, hoping that the government gives additional support to local authorities. And again, we are not alone, from all political colors across the country, all facing the same issues. Everyone is hoping that central government gives more money to the local authorities. So I hope at least that answered your question a bit.
If I might come back, Chair, through you, I don't have a problem with any of that, and we must lobby government and all those sorts of issues are obvious. But if I might push you, we are in an emergency, not just a health emergency, a financial emergency. And as I said, I would have expected a much more detailed plan about how we intend to recover from that. And is it possible that we could have something back at the, I know we're now having 2 of these meetings in September, certainly the latter September one, a bit more detail on what it is we're going to do, because frankly, if we haven't got this under control before Christmas, we're going to struggle to come anywhere close to on budget or even create a budget for the next financial year by the time we get to March.
I'm very happy to take that question. I mean, as you know, this is a very complex organisation. We have a transformation programme which is already underway. A lot of work is being done at present, and you can be assured that we will come back to this committee in due course, but I can't guarantee that that's going to be in September, and I have to tell you that the September running order is already looking very busy indeed. But this work is being done, and I think it's better that it's done properly than that it's done at speed for a deadline, for a possibly false deadline. Councillor Kirsch, did you want to come back? I know that Councillor Bass wants to ask a question, but please, if you have a response, please go ahead with it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, just shortly and briefly again to Councillor Davis. Like you know from your experience how budget processes work, and we are still in early stages, but like the leader said, please be assured officers and members have already started the process, and we're looking seriously and prudently how we can make a balanced budget for next year. And then again, at the same time, it is even more difficult task, as I mentioned in my introduction speech, than it always is. Figures are in flux, there are constant changes, but obviously there's not knowing what will happen with a further surge in the pandemic, further lockdowns. We can't really estimate all the figures, so it will be even more a process where we might have to adapt in the one way or the other way during the process. And like the leader said, we are looking carefully at this and taking it very, very serious.
Yes, and I would just add that it's sensible to put this in the national context. The Institute for Fiscal Studies only last week estimated that English councils are facing a budget gap of £2 billion, and that 90% of local authorities in England are facing severe financial difficulties as a result of the effort to deal with the COVID crisis. So Kingston is not alone in this, and I don't think that you'll find many local authorities who say that they have already got their plans in place at this stage. Councillor Bass.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question to ask, but I just wanted to follow on from what Councillor Davis said. Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate, obviously, it's a very difficult time, and it is for personal, family finances, council finances, and may I say, central government finances, not least because they have given unprecedented amounts to local government, and we've already had certainty in some of it, but not all of it. But I mean, obviously, that's not enough. It's never going to be enough. So we will have to work within an envelope, which will never be quite as much as we would ask for. But I do understand it's a really complicated and difficult thing to grapple with, which then makes it quite surprising that, given there's so much to get up to speed with this, you know, because we are in an emergency and things have to happen quickly, seems a curious time to change the lead person, the lead councillor for finance, when you had a very experienced and qualified one before. But anyway, that rests in your group. But it doesn't seem the best time in an emergency to do that. Anyway, so my question is, now I want to thank the finance director, because I spent a considerable amount of time going through this with her last week, so I asked quite a few questions, and I've had follow-up responses, so I'm very grateful to that. But one question I wanted to ask, so it's on paragraph 31B, and I know this is, and the reason I'm asking this is because I know that leisure centres are something that are of, you know, a lot of importance to residents, and obviously with the COVID pandemic, fitness is very important, and to many people our local leisure centres are the only affordable way of doing that. So I see that the leisure contract is forecasting an overspend of £2 million, and also of course the Kingfisher Centre is closed. So just to get an idea of what's happening behind the figures there, I just wanted an assurance that that would be the complete amount of money that was paid to have to be paid to places for people to keep the leisure centres open for the whole year. And could we have an update on the Kingfisher Centre, because obviously that will have an impact on revenue and capital budgets. And then I did have one final question, which is more for the chair, is I mean, obviously with these R&R committees, we're covering a huge span. And for ourselves, we feel it's sort of less in-depth scrutiny than a full suite of council meetings, which say Richmond Council had. And I wanted some assurance of when we'll be moving back away from these committees to normal council meetings like Richmond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. If it's all right with Councillor Kirsch, I will pick up that final point first. And if it's okay, we'll then move back to the finance questions. So I think it's worth probably just running through what we have actually managed to do in terms of virtual meetings since this crisis began. We've had, as you will very well know because you've been present at all of them, we've had monthly meetings of this Response and Recovery Committee. We've also had a full schedule of regulatory committee meetings, that's development control, the neighbourhood planning subcommittees, the licensing subcommittees. We've had a selection of other committees, including audit, governance and standards, the pension fund committee, and of course we've had full council, and not just one full council meeting. There's also been an informal briefing session of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the HOP, the Health Oversight Panel, which I know you were very concerned about. That's a total of 25 virtual committee meetings over the period, which includes the traditional summer recess. From September, we will be returning to a near normal schedule of meetings other than the strategic committees. So we will see the reinstatement of the main neighbourhood committees. At the end of the month, the Health and Wellbeing Board will be sitting. And once the Health and Wellbeing Board resumes, we will be making arrangements for the Health Oversight Panel to sit as well. But we think that because the Health Oversight Panel needs to see the workings of the Health and Wellbeing Board, it makes more sense to do it in that sequence. It means that between April, when the government introduced the legislation which allowed us to have virtual meetings, to the end of September, the net effect will have been that all we have lost is one meeting of the Health and Wellbeing Board, one meeting of audit, and one of each of the 4 neighbourhood committee meetings, and 2 meetings of the Health Oversight Panel. Now, as you know, we said when we put in place these arrangements that we would constantly review them. If I recall, at our emergency council meeting in May, there was a lot of pressure from the Conservatives for us to commit to a review 6 weeks later at the next full council meeting. And I resisted that because I assured you that we would be constantly reviewing this. And I hope that the evidence of all of those meetings, which we have now managed to conduct virtually, is evidence that I was as good as my word on that. We will be revisiting that at the next full council meeting, which is on the 13th of October. And at that point, we'll have an opportunity to further review how we move forward. But if I could point out that we have managed to do all of these things in the middle of a pandemic, so I really don't feel that we have underperformed in terms of holding ourselves to scrutiny and to having the proper decision-making process available for everyone to see. You asked, I will pass on to Councillor Kirsch, but you asked one question about the Kingfisher. And I would just say on that that is something that we are hoping to bring to the September meeting of this committee. But Councillor Kirsch, can I hand over to you now?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bass, for your questions. And in regards to the leisure centres, as you might recall from the last meeting when we agreed on the rescue package for Places Leisure, which you mentioned in your question. So that covers all the costs up to the end of this financial year in end of next March. And furthermore, there is the caveat, if now as the leisure centres are fortunately opened again, Places Leisure makes a bit more revenue than expected, then some of that money might come back to RBK again. So depending, they are making more money than they expected, there will be some recovery of that, but it covers the whole rest of the financial year, as you might have seen from last meeting's papers. And I also would like to add that the contract with Places Leisure, as we mentioned last meeting again, it's a very specific contract which we are obliged to pay any incurring loss to Places Leisure. Hence, this the whole leisure contract we had to do, we have been legally obliged to pay this recovery costs to Places Leisure. And we are glad that the leisure centres are now open again, and that Places Leisure has done their utmost in getting they open again, and people can enjoy our leisure centres again. And we are grateful that they even managed to open the athletic track for the clubs earlier. And also on the Kingfisher, like the leader already mentioned, either to next committee or the committee in October, we hope to bring a paper where we have a range of options what we are doing with the Kingfisher Centre, and we then also will publish the two reports at the same time. So I hope that answered your questions.
Okay, Chair, I just wanted to thank you for your answers, but could I just come back on one of the points, please?
Of course.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Kirsch. That's so we'll await that. Obviously, that's something that residents are very concerned about. But I just wanted to come back to the Chair on the question of meetings, and I think you were probably anticipating my question there, as that was a very comprehensive response. But that's good to be prepared. But my question, I mean, I'm a bit bemused that neighbourhoods are going back before strategic committees, and I still am a bit bemused of why Richmond were able to hold full meetings and we're not. But, you know, to be honest, I mean, it's quite nice to have a break from meetings, and I'm not really after meetings for meeting's sake. But by not having strategic meetings and neighbourhood meetings, is that my concern is, and it has directly impacted on certain residents in my ward, is that they have had less access to ask public questions. So let me give you an example, and I think you probably guessed which example I'd use, and that's of Cumberland House. So planning to put a 9-storey block on the already densely populated council estate of Cumberland House. Well, that decision was passed under emergency powers, not through a committee, so effectively behind closed doors. Our residents have had no real opportunity to raise their concerns. The only because we had, because the only sort of main strategic, main formal meeting was council meeting. So the residents presented a petition at the last full council. They had 2 minutes to speak. We didn't have a chance to debate it. We'd have had much more chance at other committees. And we're still waiting for a response. And yet in the meantime, the planning application has gone in. So that's my concern about the meetings. It's just residents have not had a chance to raise things that are important to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bass. You're referring, of course, to the Small Sites programme, which will bring another 101 council homes to this borough. And that's a scheme that I know is controversial, but I also think is very important. I don't at all recognise the accusation that this is being done behind closed doors. In my own ward, there is a scheme also for additional council units. Again, very controversial, and I'm very conscious of how concerned my residents are about it. But I know that in each ward where these sites were proposed, during the engagement process where we couldn't, I mean, let's be fair, we can't have public meetings and we can't have exhibitions in the way that you would normally do. I'm sorry, it's a pandemic. There's nothing we can do about that. So we've done everything we can to try to engage with our residents so that they do know what's happening. And I know that in Canbury Ward, the Rupel House webinars, we had 2 of them, and they went on for several hours, and many people had an opportunity to ask questions. So I really didn't feel, though that people would prefer to have a public meeting, it's not possible to do it. And you're saying decisions are being made behind closed doors, but no decision has been made on this. You're right, the application has just been lodged, but this has not yet come in front of the Development Control Committee. So it is not a decision that's been made under emergency powers. It is all you've seen so far is the public engagement at the pre-application stage. So I'm sort of troubled, and I actually think it's unhelpful in a time of national emergency to be sort of stoking this story that everything's being done behind closed doors.
I'm sorry, Leader, that is complete hogwash. I sat in on both of the...
Councillor Bass, I would prefer if we could at least observe the courtesy of the meeting. If you'd like to ask a question, if you'd like to speak, then please put your name in the chat function. Don't just interrupt me. I don't believe it is hogwash. I think it's unhelpful when you know that we cannot have public meetings in the usual way for you to then accuse us of doing something underhand when we're doing our best to do these consultations and these engagement activities in a virtual setting. If you've got better ideas and if you've seen it done better somewhere else, please give us some constructive ideas because we want to do this well. And if you have a comment to make, please make it.
Okay, thank you. I put my name in the chat box so I could speak. I mean, maybe you had good engagement in your ward, but I sat in on the engagement things. There was 1 or 2 people in there and that was it. A lot of people in Cumberland House aren't au fait with doing online meetings, so there was very little engagement. Okay, it might be what you think's best, but I think we should ask the residents. And also, they presented a petition because, in my view, it's completely unreasonable to have this sort of consultation, initial consultation, during March and April when literally most things are stopped because we're in a national lockdown, but this was still pushed through. The residents presented a petition in the only format that they had, which was 2 minutes at full council, and nobody has come back to them on that. That's disgraceful. I mean, you may think that this is the right thing to do, but we represent residents. I represent my Coombe Hill residents, and I think it's important that they're listened to, and I don't really feel that's happened. So that's my view. You have your view, and I think it's probably best to leave it there tonight.
I would just ask you one question. How would you do the consultation better?
I said you delay it and not do it in a national lockdown.
But you also are probably aware that the funding for this scheme, if you believe that we need more council homes, the funding for this scheme requires us to do it to a timetable. And if we were to delay it, we would lose the funding and it would not be possible.
So you do it regardless of what Cumberland House residents think.
I'm sorry, Councillor Bass, I lost you at that point.
So you're saying you'll do it regardless of what Cumberland House residents think?
Please don't put words in my mouth. I did not say that. I asked you if you had any ideas of how to do an engagement better in a virtual setting, because we're very open to ideas and we want to engage, and we find it difficult too. We don't know how to do this well when we can't do it in the normal way. But I don't think you have an answer for that. I think Councillor Dave Ryder-Mills would like to speak. Councillor Ryder-Mills?
Yes, just trying to unmute myself. I was very concerned that Councillor Bass suggested that we delayed things. I've spent my whole day dealing with casework of very overcrowded households in very poor accommodation. The Small Sites programme is there to try and quickly produce at least a bit more accommodation that we can satisfy a few of the people who are on our housing waiting lists and housing registers. And to suggest that we delayed things, I find intolerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryder-Mills. And I would support that. We have more than 3,000 households on the waiting list for social housing. This is an urgent problem, and I think we have to treat it as such. If there are, Councillor Bass, you'd like to pick up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, my signal cut out at a key time. I just, so I've got one question. Has the council asked the GLA whether it's possible to delay the deadline so that the initial consultation can be done at basically not in national lockdown?
I'm very happy to pass that on to officers.
Good evening, Chair. If I may, just to give a response to that, members will be aware that the Small Sites programme is actually linked to the Cambridge Road Estate programme, and a decision was taken a while ago to bring forward these sites that help facilitate that decamp that we will need in terms of that wider regeneration programme that we have. And as has already been said, there is a time limited amount of time that the GLA has given us, and members will be aware that if that money isn't spent in accordance to that, there is always the risk that that money could be redistributed to elsewhere. So we have moved forward to bring forward these small sites. Members were engaged last year on some of the plans that we had, and we have done the consultation in requirement and in line with the government's notice to local authorities to take into consideration that we were in full lockdown, and for local authorities to understand that consultation would need to take form in different ways and new ways than we would have done if we hadn't been in lockdown. I hope that helps. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Bass, I would just say we are veering so far off the agenda tonight. Cumberland House.
But with respect, my question wasn't answered. Has the council asked the GLA for a delay given the COVID situation? That was my question.
I think, Councillor Bass, that Naz has answered that. I think that since this is not an agenda item, we really need to move back to the agenda, because this is a decision-making committee. If anyone has any more questions about this agenda item, I'm very happy to take them. Otherwise, I think we should move to a vote. So can we agree this item unanimously, or do members wish to go to a vote? If you would like to go to a vote, please say so in the chat function. I think that means that we are able to pass this item unanimously. So thank you very much. I'd now like to move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Dementia Care Nursing Home. Councillor Bolt, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. This is a report updating the committee on the status of the Dementia Care Home project. Following the decision at the May Response and Recovery Committee to initiate a search for an external provider to operate the Dementia Care Home, the purpose of this item is to update the committee on the progress of the search for a potential operator. The report also covers the current status of the construction programme, and clarification of the potential for adult social care to access beds in the completed home. The good news is that we're on our way to fulfilling our pledge to provide a good, new, quality dementia care home in a great location in Kingston. This new care home will provide a much needed service for the growing number of people who need specialised dementia care. As you will remember from the previous discussions prior to the May Response and Recovery Committee meeting, there were 3 possible options identified for this project. Option 1 was to establish a local authority trading company to operate the dementia care home. Option 2 was to deliver the service in-house, and option 3 was to commission an external provider. Options 1 and 2 were discounted at that meeting. Option 1, the local authority trading company, was rejected because when the land value of the site and the legal requirement for the local authority trading company to compete on the open market for the council placements were taken into account, this option became financially unviable. Option 2, operating the dementia care home in-house, was rejected because financial modelling showed that this option would be more expensive than if the council were to procure beds on the open market. This would put severe pressure on the adult social care budget and would also mean that the costs of building the dementia care home would not be recovered. The financial unviability of this option is exacerbated by the costs of setting up the required clinical governance in-house, as well as the more general issue of the likelihood of occupancy levels in the current COVID-19 climate being too low to cover the costs of the service. The costs of either pausing the project or terminating it completely appear to be prohibitive. So this committee resolved in May that officers would be tasked with attempting to find an external provider to lease and operate the home. Consequently, over the last 2 months, the council has been seeking potential operators for the dementia care home. It's clear that there's a perceived need for this sort of provision in our borough, as a significant amount of interest in the project has been expressed by a number of very reputable potential operators, resulting in a number of written bids. These bids are currently being assessed by officers with a view to identifying the most commercially favourable partner. The leader, the portfolio holder for finance, and myself have been receiving regular briefings from officers both on the progress of the project and more recently the comparative merits of the various bids. A number of factors will influence the decision on the bids, including the benefits resulting to our residents, the amount of rent offered, the number of modifications the operator will require to the original design, the costs of which will be for the council to bear, and obviously the overall return that the council is likely to receive from the operator. The committee is being asked to note the progress made on the project since May, approve the adult social care approach to the use of beds within the dementia care home, and to authorise the executive directors of place and corporate and communities to define the scope of the best commercial terms and report back to the committee in September. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolt. Can I just ask, before we move the motion, whether officers have anything they would like to add at this point? And I would just remind everyone that there are some confidential annexes to this report. So if anyone should wish to discuss anything in those annexes, we will need to move into private session. So please give us fair warning. I will now move the recommendations at the front of the report on page B1. Councillor Bolt, would you second them, please?
Yes, I'm happy to second those.
Thank you very much. I see that Councillor Davis is already wanting to speak. So Councillor Davis, would you like to kick off the debate?
Thank you very much. I don't want to go into any of the details on the papers at all, or even the exempt items. I think the difficulty we're now getting ourselves into, and in a sense we had this debate and discussion at the previous Response and Recovery Committee when this came before us, and we requested this update at this stage, is that there is the potential for turning what is potentially very, very good news into a bit of a disaster area. Back in the end of 2017, at the December 2017 meeting of the committee that covered adults at that time, the decision was taken to progress this. And at that time, a very clear timetable and order of doing things was set out. The first thing that was supposed to happen was that we were to go and find an operator, because there was very much the view that you can't design a care home until you have an operator. And it's clearly written in those papers and the minutes of that December 2017 meeting that that was the process we were going to follow. get an operator, get them involved in the design, go to planning, get planning, deliver, and engage that way. Now, that hasn't happened, and that's in a sense why we're in the situation we're currently in, which fills me with grave concern, because we've now put ourselves in a position where we're building a home where, I don't know how far we're through the build, but it's probably quite a significant way now, and the costs are mounting, and yet we don't have an operator, and more than that, we now seem to be rowing back on the whole principle behind establishing this care home. The principle being, number one, that it was there to address the higher needs element of care within the borough, but was also there to help us address some of the issues that the council had in placing its own clients into those care homes. And in fact, I checked again today, the current website for the dementia care home says that it will be delivered using a 60-40 ratio for delivery, i.e. 40% of those people going to that care home will be Kingston funded. Now, we seem to be rowing back on that, and it's not the job of Kingston Council or the council taxpayers of Kingston to use its land to build a private sector care home. That's just not what we're here for. And I can't believe that the administration believes that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be building something for a for-profit organisation without getting any other benefit other than a long-term lease on the building. And so I'm very concerned about the position we find ourselves in. We are where we are. We can't go back. We can't reverse what wasn't done and what should have been done in the outset of this project. We can't reverse that. But I do believe we ought to be trying to enshrine the principle, to stand up for the things that we said we were going to do for people who require this sort of care, this sort of high needs dementia care, and in trying to ensure that we find a way of getting that 40%, regardless of what the market says to us. Because unless we stand up for it and state tonight that we believe we ought to have 40% of that care home going to Kingston funded residents without the need for a third party payment, then I think we're letting Kingston residents down, and that would be a grave error on my view. Now, it's difficult, a very difficult issue, but I do believe that we've got to stand up for them, because I don't believe it's reasonable to continue the way we are. So that's my concern. We've embarked on this, we've got it the wrong way around, we've got ourselves back down an alley where we're very much, it would appear on paper, at the behest of those who might come and join us as partners. And we're finding it very difficult to find a way out of it that satisfies the needs of Kingston. So what I am going to propose is that we move an amendment to this to reaffirm this, so we can all just tonight reaffirm our commitment to those 40% that we wanted of beds, which would be available for Kingston places without that third party payment, and just make that affirmation so it's very clear to the private sector that that's what we want. And then when it comes back to us in the next month, at the next meeting, I think it is, then we can take a view as to whether actually, this is the test, whether that private sector has responded to the needs of Kingston. So I'm going to put briefly into the chat, but I will read it out for the record, an amendment which I want to move. And that's that we insert at the end of recommendation 2, and open brackets, but this council, open speech marks, but this council reaffirms its commitment that 40% of the places in the new home will be reserved for Kingston funded residents without the need for a third party payment. Thank you, Chair.
Does anybody wish to second that amendment? Councillor
Yeah, I'm
Bass.
happy to second, yeah. Yeah, I was typing it in before you asked, I only got halfway through.
Thank you. In that case, we will be happy to debate this. I don't know whether Councillor Bolt would like to speak at this stage. I know that some of the officers would like to help us as well.
Yeah, I'd like to say a few things first about some of those comments. Unfortunately, this is a project we've inherited, and some very poor decisions were made very early on as to which have made the project financially very difficult. I would add that 70 to 75% of Kingston residents are self-funders anyway. This home will be available to those people. Obviously, you know, that's the way funding goes, and this home will be dealing with very complex cases of probably quite advanced dementia, and a number of those people will be getting continuing healthcare funded by the NHS, and obviously those people will also be able to go into the dementia care home. There's the addition of again, because the number of these people are complex cases, even if they're not eligible for continuing healthcare, they may get they may be eligible for funded nursing care, which will help pay us, you know, would contribute to a self-funders financial, you know, package that they would be paying for the care home. And it's also the case that a lot of people, when they get to the stage of dementia where they would be requiring a specialist dementia care home, would not, Kingston residents who've been living in Kingston all their lives may find that their family are not living in Kingston. Obviously, I accept that some Kingston residents, all their family will be here and they will want a care home in Kingston. I have a personal family situation going on at the moment where a resident, where a family member lives somewhere else, and we're thinking of bringing her closer because nobody else lives near her. And I think that's the case. A lot of Kingston residents who found themselves in this situation may end up transferring to another area as well. So I think there's lots of factors to bear in mind with this. It's not as simple as funding. You know, the funding thing it's very important. I accept that. But there are other funding streams coming into place for these people, and a lot of Kingston residents, well, the vast majority of Kingston residents are self-funded anyway, because we are a wealthy borough.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolt. I know that some of the officers would like to come in because there's a technical matter that I think that Councillor Davies's amendment is not possible within the Care Act, but I would like to call on officers, please, to clarify that.
Leader, it's Helen Coombs here. Shall I just come in? Sorry. So under the Care Act, we have something called a choice directive, and within that choice directive, the local authority has to offer choice in terms of when they fund people's care. Within Kingston, you have a policy in place which offers a radius of 25 miles, and there is a process that follows. So we can't make people go into this care home. We have to offer them choice, for all sorts of reasons, as Councillor Bolt explained. People make those decisions, so they will still be able to access this care home, but it is within that choice directive, and it is within the price that the council can fund. It is also for committee to be aware is that not only does the council have to comply with the Care Act, but it must also demonstrate best value in seeking placements. So it's balancing those two duties that we get to the point of how we offer choice. And then the last thing that I'd just like to reinforce is that at the point that people do need dementia care, many people will have also access to funded nursing care, which is a payment made by the NHS on top of the residential rate that the local authority pay. And when it comes to funded nursing, fully funded continuing healthcare, at the moment, it would appear that this home would be within the sort of band that the Kingston, it's not now, South West London CCG buys continuing healthcare. So we would expect Kingston residents who have that complex need to be able to access this home.
Thank you very much, Helen. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this amendment? I mean, I think it's clear that the amendment isn't technically possible, but if anybody else would like to speak about it, they're very welcome to. I don't know whether Councillor Davis would like to speak further before we go to a vote.
Yes, I'm happy to. I mean, I didn't hear anything there that said this wasn't possible. It is entirely possible, as it was at the outset of this dementia home, because that's the criteria we set it against. So it's on the council's website that that's what we wanted to achieve. Look, there was as I said at the beginning, there was a very, very clear decision taken by councillors in a committee to progress this care home in a certain way, and that somewhere along the line changed. And you know, all parties agreed that we wanted to have this care home, and it was to be done in a certain manner, and that was to recruit first the management company that we were going to enter into a partnership with before we started building it. And we now seem to have got ourselves in this crazy situation. I think the problem I have, and you know, the real problem that's at the heart of this is that if all that I've heard this evening so far from both officers and members who've spoken on this is true, then actually just sell it to the private sector, because it's the same thing. You're doing effectively the same thing. It's a matter of whether you take a capital receipt now or you just have a lease which pays you, drip feeds you over a certain number of years. But effectively, this is a private care home that the council is building, and I don't believe that's the right thing to be doing.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. Shall we go to a vote? I'm presuming that Councillor Davis and Councillor Bass would like a vote, and for that reason, I'll ask Fiona, please, to call members out.
Thank you, Chair. I will now take a roll call on Councillor Davis's amendment. Councillor Bass.
For the amendment.
Councillor Bolt.
Against.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Dunstone.
Against.
Councillor Gander.
Against.
Councillor Kerr.
Against.
Councillor Kerr.
Against.
Councillor Ryder Mills.
Against.
Councillor Moll.
Against.
Councillor Stewart.
Against.
And Councillor Sweeney.
Against.
Thank you, Chair. That amendment is lost 9-4, 2 against 9-4.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Do any members want to speak on the motion itself? Or shall we go straight to a vote on that? I think we're ready to go to a vote. Does anybody feel the need for a vote? Okay, we'll have a vote. So I'll be asking Fiona to call it out.
Thank you, Chair. To a vote on the main recommendation, Councillor Bass.
Abstain.
Councillor Bolt.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Abstain.
Councillor Dunstone.
For.
Councillor Gander.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Kerr.
For.
Councillor Ryder Mills.
For.
Councillor Moll.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Councillor Sweeney.
For.
Thank you, Chair. The main substantive motion is carried, 9 in favour with 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We'll now move to the next item on the agenda, which is also down to Councillor Bolt to please introduce. This is the adult social care passenger transport provision.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this paper is to seek approval from the committee of the introduction of a new system for purchasing passenger transport for adults with social care needs. The Council is looking to access and be a named contracting authority for the dynamic purchasing system currently operated by Sutton Council. This will allow the Council to arrange contracts under the system that meet specific needs of our residents. Specific as approval is sought for the Council to enter into a contract with Adam HTT, who is the provider of the software, which is the basis of the dynamic purchasing system, using a Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation framework. The proposed contract will be for 3 years initially, with an option to extend until July 2025. The dynamic purchasing system will enable a more flexible and cost-effective approach to the provision of passenger transport in the borough. Potential providers will need to go through an approval process covering, for example, areas such as safe recruitment, safeguarding training, DBS checks, and standards around the conditions of the vehicle to be used by the provider. Sutton Council has been using the dynamic purchasing system successfully for just under a year, and in January 2020 reported an 8.3% reduction in costs as a result of the new system. Other areas using a similar models have reported savings of up to 10%, most importantly, with no reduction in the quality of the service provided, evidenced by positive responses in user surveys. It's accepted that the new system will need to be introduced gradually over the next 6 months, and the Council will be working with and consulting both providers and users extensively to ensure that all parties are comfortable with the new system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do any officers wish to add anything at this point? If not, I'll move the recommendation at the front of the report on page C1. Councillor Bolt, will you second these?
Yes, please. I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much. Can members indicate if they'd like to speak on this item? If not, then we can go straight to a vote. Could you indicate in the chat function if you'd like a vote? In that case, I'm going to take it that this item can be passed unanimously. Thank you very much. So that recommendation is agreed. There are no urgent items authorised by the Chair, so that concludes the business for this evening. The time is 20:26. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.